An interesting rumor has been circulating recently, one that's frankly deeply perplexed me, and one that I think needs to be aired out a little more. The rumor is as follows. Microsoft, in an attempt to keep Xbox alive and relevant for at least one more console generation as a functioning hardware ecosystem, is going to pursue a more open-ended machine that would, amongst other functionality, allow players to load alternate storefronts like Steam and their external libraries therein. It's true that this may very well come to pass. The sources that are reporting on this, the likes of friend of Last Stand Jez Corden, are typically quite reliable. But I can't help but ask a simple question, one that I feel like no one else is actually pursuing. How does running Steam on Xbox help Xbox? Indeed, doesn't that actively hurt and hinder Xbox? Seriously, think about it. Don't just rush off to the comments to whine, that's far too predictable. Instead, truly ponder the issue. If Xbox runs Steam, how does Xbox make any money? If your next Xbox is a bona fide Steam machine, isn't that effectively the actual end of the entire Xbox ecosystem? If you were given the choice of buying games on Steam and Xbox, which share virtually identical libraries when it comes to thousands of important titles, but with one ecosystem far larger and more prodigious sucking all of the oxygen out of the room, how does Xbox benefit? The answer is simple. It doesn't. So why are so many people cheering this, Xbox fans specifically? Honestly, I don't get it. It's like rooting for your own demise. Video game consoles are hardly anything new, and indeed, the original consoles, your Magnavox Odysseys, for instance, are over 50 years old now. It's kind of crazy to consider. But from the very beginning, consoles with interchangeable cartridges and later discs and now download packages were only ever sold for one reason, and one reason only: to push as many games as possible to consumers. And later peripherals too, and these days subscriptions and microtransactions and so much more. But the point is, a console was never a one-off sale. By design, it couldn't be. Rather, it was an investment for both sides, for the company selling it and the person buying it, as their relationship was really just beginning. Selling only a console to a consumer and nothing else would have been like selling a VCR or DVD player to someone but never a tape or disc. This wouldn't only rapidly result in a net loss for many manufacturers over the decades, especially early in respective generations, it also constitutes a commercial dead end. The entire notion of selling consoles was fostering years-long economic interactions, keeping hardware in your entertainment center for hopefully a long time to come, grinding away at your wallet and making back profit over time. This metric used to be primarily measured by statistics like attach rate. For instance, my favorite console of all time, the NES, first launched in the American market in 1985 for $200, which is sadly well over $500 in today's money, adjusted for inflation. Globally, it sold roughly 62 million units before being discontinued in the mid-90s, and was available for as little as $49.99 during the top-loader dog-bone controller era. There were something like 700 games or so launched for the NES in America over a decade, and more than 1,000 globally, with a huge number of Japanese exclusives. And between first and third-party titles, Nintendo managed to shift some 500 million games for the console, giving NES an attach rate of 8. In other words, the average NES owner bought the console, then spent money on 8 games above and beyond that. The attach rate is where Nintendo made all of its profit. They sold you a console for no more than $200, but they netted something like $400 unadjusted for inflation per customer above and beyond that, often through licensing deals and basic cartridge manufacture that barely required them to lift a finger. Indeed, as is the case today, companies were falling all over themselves to publish on Nintendo hardware, which is one of the great advantages of running a console ecosystem. Without game sales, Nintendo wouldn't have made anything at all on the NES or any of its other hardware. Clearly, this is still true today. I know this seems obvious, and I'm not trying to be mean here, it's blatantly far from obvious for too many people. The current discourse proves that, because what Microsoft is gearing up to do with Steam means that this vital source of income, this essential lifeblood of all consoles since the early 1970s, risks drying up. And then what? For the sake of argument, let me put things in plainer terms. Days ago, Microsoft released an image of some Xbox hardware and mock-up UI screens emblazoned with the text, "Opening a billion doors with Xbox." At first glance, it looks like any other boring marketing imagery, but eagle-eyed viewers quickly took notice of something quite important: an Xbox dashboard with a Steam option. This obviously got everyone extremely excited, and honestly, the idea sounds pretty cool for consumers. Options are good. According to reports surrounding a so-called Project Kennen, which is Microsoft's rumored foray into partnered devices, apparently with the hardware manufacturer Asus to start, Microsoft will begin supporting external hardware that will connect with Xbox's environment of games and online play, and this initial hardware will be in handheld form. Perhaps this all connects to Xbox's future remains to be seen, but as a day one adopter of and true believer in PlayStation Portal more recently, which is an exceptional device for local play, and as a bona fide Nintendo nerd in my earliest decades, not to mention my obsession with Vita, I love the idea of core gaming bending the arc back towards handhelds, at least more so than the last, say, decade. We can thank Nintendo and Valve for that, of course, and so who wouldn't want to get into bed with Valve, get Steam running on their hardware, and net the benefits? Benefits being the key word. If you're a small hardware manufacturer that typically makes its money at a lone point of sale, like Asus as an example, the benefits will be great. You're in the hardware in hands business, and what people do from there with their purchase is entirely up to them. But Microsoft isn't in that business. They literally never, ever have been for even 1 second in the corporation's entire history going back to the 70s. Quite the contrary. When it comes to Xbox, Microsoft is in the selling games, selling subscriptions, selling expansions, and selling microtransactions business, all of which is facilitated on their hardware via their storefront and their storefront alone. Right now, Xbox Series X and S have maybe sold just north of 30 million units since launching in the fall of 2020, and each of those 30-ish million consoles can only interface with Microsoft itself. If you want to buy a game, you do it on Xbox's storefront, or physically via a copy of whatever game is published for Xbox with Xbox's blessing. If you buy a Fortnite skin on Xbox, Microsoft gets a cut. If you buy a future Civilization 7 expansion on Xbox, Microsoft gets a cut. The entire premise of selling gaming hardware at scale is to monopolize the console's monetization. Right now, no one makes a single penny on Xbox without Microsoft getting their piece. This is the way it's always worked. When Rockstar sells a copy of Grand Theft Auto 6 on Xbox Series X or S later this year, and assuming it costs $70, Rockstar will walk away with $49 and Microsoft with $21. Multiply that by millions of copies and you can see the very definition of latent income. Xbox, like Sony and Nintendo, are totally reliant on this model. Undoing it is likely impossible. Then again, that doesn't mean Microsoft isn't about to try. So let's really illustrate the issue at hand. The next Xbox comes out, and it's some sort of simplified gaming PC running Windows and with an Xbox vertical. There's no doubt that some people will continue to buy games on Xbox, subscribe to Game Pass, and microtransact until the cows come home, and that's all well and good. But if this new Xbox gives players the option to access Steam, and that's where many players migrate, it's likely those players were never really Xboxes to begin with, or perhaps once were and are now gone forever, or at least partially or potentially even mostly inaccessible to Microsoft moving forward. This leaves the point of sale of the console itself as the only true financial interaction between the sides. Steam will then get another piece of agnostic hardware which to run off of, which I'm fairly positive they won't argue with. They're the only real winner in this entire hypothetical scenario, one that is nonetheless likely to come to pass. Let me just lay it all out there for those that don't get it. If the next Xbox runs Steam, Xbox won't make any money whatsoever off of any of the games sold there. There's zero precedent for a company like Valve to cut in a third entity, and they have no motivation to do so. It's thus reasonable to expect that Steam access on an Xbox console will be a huge incentive for millions and millions of PC players, or the PC curious, which will then, for the first time in the entire history of the games industry mind you, buy games from another entity and completely circumvent the console host entirely. It's weird to me that people don't seem to understand this, and how slippery of a slope this ultimately becomes for Microsoft. It's especially strange when you consider that Xbox's own games are on Steam, meaning that not only could players opt to buy the Steam version rather than the Xbox version, but that doing so will slice a full 30% off of Xbox's cut, hurting them even more. If that game was purchased on the Xbox storefront, that 70% cut from the Steam sale would be 100%. But things get even crazier when you consider the vast majority of products people will want that Microsoft has nothing to do with. On this new Xbox, someone could roll up and buy, say, The Witcher 4 on Steam. 70% of that money will go to CD Projekt, 30% of it will go to Steam, and 0% of it will go to Microsoft. Buying it on Xbox means that the same 70% would go to CD Projekt, but the 30% that went to Valve would now go to Microsoft. It should frankly be obvious to anyone with a brain how badly this can decay, and again, Valve has no reason to consider Microsoft's position and make it more palatable. Someone might say, well, maybe Steam will cut Xbox in. Where would that money come from exactly? From whose pocket will Microsoft's cut be extracted? There's a fat chance there will be any sort of accommodation for this. This is why the entire idea of PlayStation games running on Xbox through Steam receives a major shrug from me and most other people. If you squint and look really hard, maybe you see that as a win for Microsoft, until you realize that Player X went on Steam via Xbox, purchased The Last of Us Part 2 for $70, and sent $49 to Sony, $21 to Valve, and $0 to Microsoft. There's all of this conjecture out there that Sony would try to stop this from happening somehow, whether technically or perhaps more overtly, but why would they? Why would Sony care if someone purchased a copy of one of their games on Steam and played it on Xbox? The only entity of the three that receives nothing from such an arrangement is indeed Xbox. So if I were at Sony, I wouldn't only not worry about this, but I'd lean into it. It's the ultimate capitulation. If we go back in time and create an alternate reality, it would be akin to being able to play SNES cartridges on a Genesis and Sega releasing a press release talking about how great this new reality is. It would initially seem like a bad thing for Nintendo and a great thing for Sega, at least until you thought about it for all of 2 seconds. Yeah, someone went and spent a couple of $100s on the Genesis only to send all of their subsequent vital dollars to someone else. That's not a win, that's a huge loss. How can people not get this? So will Steam run on the next Xbox? It seems likely. Will this massively undercut Microsoft's own business of selling games, downloads, and services? Almost certainly. Are there more holes in this idea than a slice of Swiss cheese? Absolutely, because it gets even deeper than what I've outlined here. For instance, what happens to what was formerly Xbox Live but is now a low-end rung of Game Pass? Why would people pay for online play on Xbox when they can just boot up their Xbox, buy the same game on Steam, and then play online for free? How much money would Microsoft lose on that alone? Has anyone really thought through the Steam on Xbox thing? It sure doesn't seem like it. But I'll definitely be interested to see how it all pans out. For the time being, though, this seems like more grasping at straws to keep something increasingly irrelevant somehow relevant, all while cutting off one's nose to spite one's face.